Welcome to Backyard Cigars. And today I'm going to smoke the Cinco Webster cigar from 1947. I am glad that you have joined me today because this is the second part of the Cinco legacy videos. And right now, what we're going to do is take a closer look at the cigar and catch up with a little bit of history back in the 1940s. Welcome to Backyard Cigars, a closer look at the Cinco 1947. And this is a Perfecto Vitola that we're looking at right here. Manufactured and produced in 1947, courtesy of the Vintagecigarstore.com. Now, this particular Cinco cigar has very interesting specs. But first, I think it's important that we open it up, right? Just remove that band, place it here. There we go. And we're going to remove the cellophane. Ooh, there it goes. Just opened up. Those were the types back then. You just opened up. Now you put the band back on. And we get a closer look at it. Yep. You see the crystals on there, right? You see that, right? And you see that. You see that? The difference? Now the previous, it almost looks like it is a barber pole cigar, right? With the different shades. Well, it kind of sort of is. I'm going to explain to you. And with that, looks like it was rolled by a Cuban cigar maker. But it wasn't. It wasn't. So, I'm going to tell you the specs first of all. The wrapper on this was generally one of three things. It could either be Connecticut Shade Broadleaf. Yeah, you haven't heard of that one, right? Bet you haven't. Connecticut Shade Broadleaf. No, you haven't heard of that. But there was such a thing. Now, in this case, the third option, which I'm not 100% sure of and I can't verify other than by looking at what I'm seeing here, is that there's Connecticut Shade and Connecticut Shade Broadleaf used together to form this wrapper. Now, this cigar is machine made, as it was produced in 1947, at a time when the machine process was well into effect, and the popular method of making cigars, mass producing cigars, especially cigars like this. This cigar had a binder from Puerto Rico. It had filler from Puerto Rico and Cuba. And the tobacco was aged 3 years before rolling, as was the Eisenlohr tradition. It is completely long filler. There is no short filler in this cigar. And the cost of this cigar in 1947 was 10 to 11 cents, which, if you do the calculation, is equivalent to a little under $5 in 2023 for a cigar. The income value is measured as the multiple of the average income that would be needed to buy a commodity. It uses the index of the GDP per capita. So an economic share value for this cigar would have been $11 in 2023. But I like to go sometimes with the income and labor value, which is, to me, a little bit more in line with the true value of it. Manufacturers. And you see that right there? WT Company Incorporated, Webster Tobacco Company Incorporated. And please tear. So just tear there. Now, I've made mention of Cinco being a great legendary company. And it was. It was the original 5-cent cigar king for quite some time in the early 1900s. From 1911 to 1915, that was increased to 6 cents. In 1916, the price was cut to 5 cents, but was still sold in many places at 6 cents until 1918. From 1911 to 1918, the company used Wisconsin binders, probably into the early 20s as well. Used Pennsylvania broadleaf filler with Cuban filler in their blends up until 1918. Used Sumatran wrappers from the 1920s to the 1930s. Used Connecticut shade and Connecticut shade broadleaf from the 1930s until the 1940s. Used tobacco cured in claret wine in the 1920s. And during this time, Cinco was still a major player in the declining cigar industry. Now, if we take a look at this ad from the Spokesman Review in May of 1941, you see the mildest 5 cent with hole in the head for a smooth, cool smoke. And we know that inside this box here, there is something that alludes to the hole in the head, which was kind of popular during the 1940s. Roy Tan, cigars, the American Tobacco Company cigars, a lot of them had pre-drilled hole in the heads. This one doesn't, but others did. Now, what you're seeing here is a W.E. Smokers cigar. Webster Eisenlohr Smokers. Perfecto and Panatella. And this was a cigar that was 5 cents. And if you see here, now I smoke 100% long imported filler, liberally blended with Havana, yet I pay 5 cents. That filler, that imported filler that they're not mentioning, is Puerto Rican filler. Now you're thinking, this is machine made. I thought machine made offered more uniformity, and it did. It did in terms of shape and the overall process. But machine-made cigars were a little different at that time. So the technology was improving, had improved greatly from the 1920s. Although I kind of like the machine-made cigars from the 1920s more so than the 1940s, because in the 1920s, the technology prevented them from just using the machines, and they had to, of course, incorporate some hands into the process, which gave it that look. Can you see that here? Now, this is an ad here that you're looking at, and it's an ad that was from a book. The book produced this ad. The name of the book is called Soldiers Field, Chicago's Soldiers Field by Paul Mitchell. And in it, he has this ad for Cinco. And of course, Cinco was an advertising giant, great spectator sport Cinco. But here we learn what Cinco means, at least to the company. Cinco means 5. We know that. Cinco means 5 in Spanish. Number 1, Havana, gives Cinco aroma. Number 2, Puerto Rican, gives it flavor and mildness. Number 3, broadleaf, gives it mellowness. Number 4, shade grown, gives it character. And number 5, 100% long filler makes it burn slowly and evenly. Try Cinco, you'll see it's worth a darn sight more than its low price. And at the bottom here, you have this 1946 advertisement purports that the flavor and aroma of a Cinco cigar will only add to the excitement and satisfaction of a game at Soldiers Field. And of course, you have that good American cigar, 11 cents. Now, they mentioned broadleaf gives it a mellowness, and you're thinking, I don't think broadleaf is mellow. Well, no, but they had a special technique, a secret technique that they were revered for, in which they were able to mellow their broadleaf using fermentation techniques as well as extended aging, those 3 years before rolling of the tobacco. And this gave them an edge. Now, this ad here was from Life magazine, 1947. And of course, it's a holiday advertisement. Merry Christmas to all. Cinco, that good American cigar, 10 cents, right? But what it says is, time to give thanks for a lot of important things, including the great American tradition, turkey, and all the fixins. And you'll be more than ever thankful if you have it the way the Olmsted restaurant likes it. I know that nice place in Washington, D.C. After you've eaten too much, who doesn't, at Christmas, make yourself really solidly comfortable with a good cup of coffee and the smooth, satisfying flavor of Cinco, that good American cigar. Do you know Cinco? Its long filler is made from choice vintage Cuban and Puerto Rican tobaccos, skillfully blended and wrapped in the same fine shade grown with used in the more expensive cigars. Try Cinco with your coffee this noon, tonight, or anytime you feel the need of smoking enjoyment. Plus 10 cents worth more. Box of 50, $4.75. It looks like the box that I have here. Sure does. And we take a closer look at the box once again. And this is the Webster tobacco influence in the packaging as well. This is a Cinco Webster cigar. And you see now 5 cents. Of course, we've already touched base on the timeline for this particular box. I doubt it's not the 1940s because it wasn't 5 cents. So we've gone over that this can actually be from 1916, this box, or possibly 1927. So in the 1940s, the Webster Tobacco Company was distributing and even involved in the manufacturing of the Cinco cigar. And we see here that this particular ad is called Sunday on Telegraph Hill. And it talks about the virtues of enjoying your Sunday, a day to relax, Sabbath day. No, I'm just kidding. The Sunday cigar at a weekday price, 10 cents. And this here says, the last ad actually mentioned Puerto Rican tobaccos. It didn't say imported filler. They slowly try to inform the cigar smoker of what he's smoking. But first they want him to like it. So they just say imported filler. And then once they start liking it, well, guess what? That's actually Puerto Rican filler. So here they talk about 6 words give you the secret of Cinco success, costly tobacco at a popular price. Cinco flavor comes from its 100% Caribbean filler, grown and cured under ideal conditions in Cuba and Puerto Rico. Long leaves of these 2 choice tobaccos run the entire length of your Cinco. The wrapper is silky Connecticut shade grown. Costly to us, but not to you. Cinco is the only cigar in America with this blend of these tobaccos that sells for only a dime. This is another popular cigar ad from 1947, also from Life magazine, which the Eisenlohr Webster company paid a lot of money to get their ads run. And this, you see here that now the price has jumped to 11 cents for this Perfecto, or 2 for 25. So you had these price increases along the way, and they were regional at times. Certain places you get them a little cheaper, but they tried to keep it at a certain price across the board. And this one here just, again, highlights the quality cigars are made of Caribbean, Cuban, or Puerto Rican filler. Cinco cigars are full-bodied and mild flavored, and their 100% long filler is a blend of top quality Puerto Rican and Havana tobaccos wrapped in finest Connecticut shade grown. And of course, this time they say no other cigar in America has this highly desirable blend for as little as 11 cents. Cinco is worthy of your proudest moments. It is a festive smoke, and it costs so little. April 1947 from the Spokane Daily Chronicle. And Peter M. Jacoy, who had a very big cigar distribution store and big shop, well known, was someone who would put out ads for the Cinco cigars, and it lists among the masters, and of course, once again, the 5 things that make Cinco such a great cigar. Let's just look at this cigar again, even closer. Look at that. This is one of the last things that I'm going to show you before we go out and light this baby up. But this is an antique Eisenlohr Cinco cigar general store humidor. So this is what a tobacconist would have had in his shop, and this is how he would have kept his Cinco cigars. And of course, this would have been offered for sale by the company, and depending on your account standing, it might have been free, or it might have been a loaner, or you might have just outright paid for it. And here you see a better view of it. So you have different sizes. Panatelas would go here, the Londres would go here, the Perfectos would go up at the top. But let's have one last up and close personal look at this cigar, right? It's in good condition. I kept it in a zip bag at 72 RH for a month. I'm going to give it the rinse. Dave Dude, thank you for your videos. They're very informative. And as I've mentioned before, you're the only guy out there other than me who's, putting stuff up online in regards to old vintage sticks. And Cinco. Really barber pole looking, right? Am I right? Slightly box pressed. Could be that it got box pressed from just being in the box for so long and the compression, but it could also just be that it was slightly box pressed. I never read anything about them being box pressed. That was an old Cuban tradition, and I don't think American manufacturers were really box pressing their cigars at the time. This was round. It just flattened out over time, being in the box so long. And for those of you who might be thinking if it's even safe to smoke something like this, 77 years old and all, it is. It's still safe. I mean, I see there are no beetle holes, anything like that. I mean, that's what you concern yourself with, right? Beetle holes, mold. And while many would say that plume is mold, and this has like a light coating of crystals that look like the early formation of that type of mold, if you want to call it that, this isn't that. And I really feel that it has maintained. It has really maintained. I mean, we're looking at a cigar that is 77 years old. You can see where the leaf here. It's a little sloppy there, right? It's a little sloppy, machine made. This was more than likely made in a factory by a young woman using the machines. Although by the 1940s, men were also operating the machines and had taken control and gotten their jobs back. So it could have been that way. But definitely an interesting cigar to look at. It definitely has more character than the 1924 version, which I showed you, which was hand rolled. But that might just be in the tobaccos that are being used for the wrapper and the time period, just the way cigars were being made. Yeah, this is just, wow. Not the prettiest, right? Not the prettiest. You see that glimmer? It was like diamonds. Like diamonds. Yep. So I think, folks, it is now time to smoke this Cinco. Welcome back from having taken a closer look. As always, I am very happy that you've joined me because I've lit up the Cinco, and it's become customary for me to light up 77-year-old cigars, 100-year-old cigars. But I don't take it for granted. I always feel that I am in a very good position because this isn't something that most people get a chance to do, to try, to experience. And I'm always grateful for the cigars that I receive. And also, I'm also grateful for my friendship with George of the Vintagecigarstore.com, who is always so helpful and always just providing the best cigars in the best condition, regardless of the age. And I think that goes such a long way to helping this channel, me in particular, make these types of videos. Because if not, then of course there are many current modern cigars to review, but if not, I would not be able to display my chops for the love of history and the cigar history that is in my head that just wants to come all out and share with you. So this is a really good opportunity to let you know what was going on at the time that these old cigars were made, and the climate, and just everything that was going into it, the types of tobaccos that were being used, the company and its standing, as well as just a lot of American history, because these are American tobaccos, American cigars. Now I said that these are American cigars, but there's also actually American tobaccos being used. When we look at the Connecticut Shade and the Connecticut Shade Broadleaf, and we look at the Puerto Rican tobacco, while Puerto Rico is not a state, was not a state, considered a domestic tobacco type. And also, these are American makers, right? So a lot of this plays into the history of the American cigar industry, which set the tone, believe it or not, for the rest of the world. And even in the 1940s, that was the case. Now here we have Eisenlohr and Brothers Tobacco Company in the 1940s, and they're struggling like everybody else. The war ended. World War II ended in 1945. In 1947, people are still clamoring for the nickel cigar. Can you believe that? And of course, a lot of people are saying, forget about it. Stop focusing on the nickel cigar, because that's gone. That's been long gone, since the 30s, to be to be specific. But you know, 1940s once again brings a new wave of technology, a new wave of cigarette sales increasing, and the cigar industry is in further decline. Matter of fact, I remember that in the 1940s, of course, when the war ended, Uncle Sam was returning a lot of the cigars for refund to the cigar makers. And the cigar makers were taking a big hit. A lot of these cigars that were getting shipped back to them were getting shipped back to them with mold, with beetles, with holes, and were not sellable, right? And they had to make the best of it. So I do remember J.C. Newman. They came out with the Cameo, which was like an old defunct Cuban brand from back in the early 1900s, and they came out with the Cameo to sort of stem the tide, if you will, and it became a pretty good seller. Regionally, nationally, it wasn't a big seller, but it was a working man's cigar and it was cheap. But Cinco kept moving right along. Let me tell you what it tastes like, because let me tell you, it's tasting good. Yeah, it's creamy, it's mild, it's very flavorful. It's sort of similar in with the spices as to the 1924 version, but I'm getting a little bit more sweetness. I could be wrong here. I'm no expert, but I'm detecting broadleaf. I'm detecting broadleaf, that taste of broadleaf. Now, how can I detect broadleaf on a 77-year-old cigar? Well, it's been preserved. It's been encased and it's been well kept. So certain things remain, right? I mean, they may be a trace, but you pick up on them. And if you're that familiar with a certain type of tobacco, like for example with me, my love of broadleaf goes way back. I love broadleaf, Connecticut broadleaf, and I can sometimes when I taste it, I just know I'm tasting it. It could be used in a binder, as a binder, and sometimes I'll detect it. And it doesn't always mean I'm 100% accurate, but I get that feeling, you know? Some of you know what I'm talking about with certain tobaccos that you really love, and when you smoke a cigar, you know, it might be Corojo, and you say, is there Corojo in here? You might not even know. But you'll say, is there Corojo in here? And they'll say, oh yeah, that has a Corojo binder or some Corojo filler. And you're like, oh, I wasn't trying to detect that. I wasn't trying to be a smart ass. But I know what I know, or I know what I taste. Yeah, so little bit of pepper in the finish, but it's subtle, and it's like a mild white pepper, right? But along with spices, not so much of the baking type, but you know, just regular spices. I don't want to say cinnamon. I can't really narrow it down just yet. There's a good creaminess to it. The feel of the tobacco feels current. It feels modern and current. If that can explain it in the best way, that's how I would say. Now, this cigar looks in the up and close. It looked box pressed. I explained that before. Probably wasn't box pressed. It was more than likely just time sitting with the other cigars in the box, because this did come from a box, that this shape kind of formed naturally, and that happens when cigars have been kept together for a really long time. And George and I have talked about it. George of the Vintagecigarstore.com, and he tells me all the time, he's like, you know, it's amazing how these things happen, but over the course of time, not only changes to the wrapper, to the filler, to the overall cigar, but to the shape of the cigar. And I think that is this is part of the aging process. When you keeping them packed, stored originally as you purchase them in a box, that could happen. So now we're getting to the point where we 1948, 1947, 1948, up until probably 1949 were the last years that Eisenlohr Webster Tobacco Company really made a push, advertising wise, sales wise, to stay in the industry, to stay afloat. But not just Eisenlohr, but many, many others folded. And it just was a sign of the times. You know, I mentioned before with cigarette sales, after World War I, a lot of people came back sick from the cigarette smoke. It was popular, but there were hazards. I mean, there's still hazards, right? Let's not kid ourselves. There's hazards. But more so in that time when they weren't fully developed. But by World War II, you know, American Tobacco had already, and Buck Duke and all of them, they had already put out a mass market cigar that was pleasing, sanitary, and safer to smoke. There were all kinds of advertising gimmicks and promises to assure people that they would not get sick. If you remember the Lucky Strikes campaign, it's toasted. You'll know what I mean. If you don't know what I mean, then, you know, I understand. But basically, they were trying to say that Lucky Strikes tobacco was different than the others. It was smoother, it was more pleasing, and it was toasted. And because it was toasted, it was less likely to irritate your throat and make you sick and feel uncomfortable. So that was the commercial. That was the advertising behind that particular cigarette. So Tony Hyman, cigarhistoryinfo.com or .org, reported in his blog that in 1952, Eisenlohr and Brothers sells company to Bayek Brothers, and officially closing in 1962. And this was the end of an era. There was court case with Webster Tobacco and their investors when they folded in 1961, before they officially shut down in 1962, and it went to the courts. Whole bunch of stuff about the value of the brands and how investors felt that they had, been taken for a ride. But essentially, 1952 was the last year that they were manufacturing and producing cigars, and that's when everything came to an end. And again, not just for Eisenlohr, but for a lot of other folks. Yeah, it's a really smooth smoke. It is a very relaxing smoke because you get flavor, all the while it's mild, but you get that flavor. You get a little bit of the spice with the cream, very similar to the 1924 version, only you get a tad bit more sweetness. And there's an added depth, and I think that it's just the difference in 77 versus 100 years, right? And being in a cellophane, which helps, and of course the technique of giving it a 72 RH stay in a zip or any kind of container for 30 days. That helps. The rinse beforehand also helps with the hydration of the wrapper. Yes, thank you once again, Dave Dude, for that. But Yeah, you could say, yeah, Jose, you're smoking 77-year-old cigar versus a 100-year-old cigar. There's going to be quite a big difference. But I really do also feel that cellophane uh, played a big role in it. And by 1947 is when you really see the cellophane being used excessively by cigar makers. Really kind of picked up in the late 20s, early 30s. But by the mid 30s to the early 40s is when you had a lot of cigar makers assuring you, the cigar smoker, that hey, we not only make the cigar in sanitary conditions, in the most sanitary way, but we also either foil wrap or cellophane your cigar for the utmost protection. And that kind of gave you the assurance that, it was a very clean and healthy cigar. If you wanted to think that way, yeah, you could. Personally, in the 40s, I was looking at cigarettes as an alternative to cigars, because when you look at cigarettes sales and the kind of advertising that had gotten an uptick in the response, right? Because people were responding to these cigarette ads, and people were excited about, a quick smoke, and the luxury of having that quick smoke was much more important in the average working man. And the average working man and woman, because they were also, targeting women for cigarettes. Initially, cigarettes were targeting women, and then eventually they convinced men through advertising, and of course through the experiences of tough men who had battled in the trenches during World War II, or possibly also World War One, and had talked about the benefits of smoking a cigarette, and how it wasn't a womanly thing to do, and how cigars are good and they're okay, but with a cigarette, you could smoke 1, 2, 3 minutes, you'd be done with it, get back to what you were doing, do your job, and it wouldn't get in the way. They were cheaper. That was another thing. And cigars just couldn't compete with the pricing. This cigar was, as I mentioned before, yeah, really creamy smoke. I'm loving this one. One of the things I read along, just finding out about Eisenlohr and Brothers Tobacco, was that I read this book, Gender and Technology, a reader, it was edited by Nina Lerman, Ruth Oldenziel, and I can't make out the other name, but they basically did a book, and in it there was a chapter on cigar making, and they mentioned the Big Ten. The Big Ten. Now, the Big Ten ruled the 20s, the 30s, to some extent, into the 40s. But the Big Ten were composed of Webster, Eisenlohr, American Cigar Company, aka American Tobacco Company, Consolidated Cigar, General Cigar, Mazer, Cressman, Puerto Rican American Tobacco Company, P. Lorillard, Lorillard, behind Newport Cigarettes, Bayek Brothers, Diesel Dremel Gilbert, I believe, or Diesel Wemmer Gilbert, and Congress Cigar. So you had these Big Ten, and the Big Ten controlled everything. They bullied people, tobacconists, into carrying their brands. They had more money to spend for advertising, and they just had more influence and leverage, and that allowed them to succeed and push brands on a national level. So that's another thing that you have to understand, is that by this time in the 1940s, cigar brands are going national. They're no longer regional. They're no longer popular by state or by county. And they're no longer, see, back in the days, cigars were made and they were popular by region. So if this particular region liked a certain type of tobacco or blend, then we made it that way. But and then if we had to sell a different type of cigar in another region, then we would just craft a cigar towards their taste. There weren't set lines, national uniform cigar lines, and I think that that played a big role in how the cigar consumer looked at his cigars. When he went to the tobacconist and to make a purchase, it really depended. Now this cigar is the same size as the 1924 Cinco Londres. It measures in at 4 7/8, but the ring gauge on it is slightly higher. If the 1924 version was between 42 and 44 ring gauge, this is probably between a 44 and a 46 ring gauge. So it's heftier, there's more tobacco in it, the smoke output is higher. You get more of a feel that this feels more modern, because in comparison to 1924, it is. And with the tobaccos, whether it's all Connecticut shade or all Connecticut broadleaf shade, I'm gonna guess that this wrapper is Connecticut shade broadleaf. That's gonna be my guess. And I know it looks like a barber pole, so who knows? But being machine made allowed them to make this cigar at 10 cents. And again, 10 cents at that time would have been the equivalent to, I would say, an $11 cigar today in 2023. And that's what it would have cost. Yeah. Little bit of spiciness on the end. Cream, general tobacco flavors, zero cardboard. It just tastes really good. So my correction, I said it equates to an $11 cigar. That was a different calculation. $5 cigar. Okay, well, let's back on. I said that actually during the closer look, that 10 cents in 1947, calculating it with a special calculation to 2023, would actually be a little under $5. So there was a great importance to the price as well. And to get this type of quality, using long filler tobaccos, using a Puerto Rican filler with a little bit of Havana, a Puerto Rican binder, all of these things were cost-cutting measures, but people still remembered that Puerto Rican tobacco was good. And they remembered that it was on par or just below Cuban tobacco, and that attracted people. But Eisenlohr tobacco was doing incredible things. So you see, long before cigar makers decided we've got to come up with different blends because of the Cuban embargo, long before that, companies like Eisenlohr and Brothers Tobacco were already doing that. They were already using alternative tobaccos to just using a straight Cuban blend. In the times of crises, they were among the few that could craft a cigar using select tobaccos that at the time we hadn't heard of, and convince us through national advertising that they were good and that we should smoke them and trust in their secret process, and along the way shape the American palate in a way that continues until today. Today you have companies using a variety of tobaccos in the United States, and these cigars are of course global. People want to smoke Nicaraguan cigars. People want to smoke Honduran cigars. People love Dominican tobacco. Puerto Rican tobacco is making a comeback. Brazilian tobacco is doing extremely well. And the tobaccos of America from Connecticut, whether it's broadleaf or shade, or whether we're talking about Pennsylvania broadleaf, are still sought after. They're still being used in blends, and they're being used today more than ever, but not like they were back then. Back then, American cigar makers knew the value and trusted in the quality of their American tobaccos. They didn't solely rely on the imported fillers like Puerto Rico and the Cuban product. They made sure to let us know that, hey, we can make a cigar using a Sumatran wrapper, which, a lot of people did. But then you had people like this that said, you know what? We're going to use a broadleaf. And we're going to do this a lot differently. And we're going to market it, and we're going to convince you to try it. We're going to give you a good price, too. The war's been hard on all of us. So sit back, have a moment, have a Cinco. Delicious. Frickin' delicious. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Till next time on Backyard Cigars.